Hello everybody and welcome to H627, and we have a little bit chillier temperature now. It's closing down to 6-7 degrees somewhere, and it's rather windy today, and I hope I can keep my voice sufficiently above the wind level. I will get some help when it comes to the sound system later this afternoon. So this might be the last one where you have to suffer this uncomfortable and disturbing background noise. I will continue today and make a little recap when it comes to proprioception and the mind. Or part of the reason for this recap is that it is a rather complicated subject. What do we have? Well, we have a completely new way of approaching the hard problem. It's quite spectacular, but it takes some getting used to. And I'd say to some part it's already been investigated, but only to a little part in modern neurology and science of cognition. But it's a bit more than that. You could say it's a transferal of the knowledge how the world works, that is quantum physics, to how the mind and matter functions. So we take something directly from reality, more or less. David Bohm translates what can only be understood mathematically into his new concepts. These new concepts need to be learned, not translated. So do not translate them. Instead, learn to use them practically. They need to be inside your heart, inside your movement. And the expressions are implicit, explicit, and hollow movement. Those are the most important anyway. And to our aid we have different metaphors. I have mentioned a few, but there are more. And as time passes and you get better at using the concepts, you can also use more complicated metaphors, where if you use those metaphors early on, those pictures early on, they will lead to either confusion or more likely misunderstanding. Nothing new there, I gather. We all know about this. So for the first time we are lifting the real working of quantum physics into a new first subject. That's what we are doing with this lecture. And the first new subject that is outside the direct domain of quantum physics, so to speak, or that's how we perceive it to be outside, it is the hard problem, the mind-body or the thought action. And this is a way of approaching the subject that to me is almost completely new. There are some hints in it in Barbara Tversky's writing and understanding of our thinking processes, but you can also find some of this in Ian McGilchrist. So what we see here, the first chapter, so to speak, is that we are taking in implicit, explicit hollow movement and apply it to the hard problem. And that partly means that the old safe divisions between thought, intention and action is going to be at least partly eroded. So the great division between thought and action is no longer going to hold. And this is what now we're striking at a very fundamental core in neurology, general thinking, classical physics, all parts of knowledge as we know today. And this is, I'd say, similar to what we find with a Klein bottle logic, where inside and outside is differentiated, but they're also the same. Different but the same. And thought and action are on two different positions on the scale, but they are not completely separated. Here we will not have the usual, the common, the ever-existing three-partitive division of analyzing and thinking, and then intention, like the thinking process sending out signal to movement, and then the actual movement. And by the way, this is also what I get when I read Green. What's his name? What's his first name? Green. And Tad Diamond. Those great authors in Alexander Technique, they make that division. What we have instead is an enfoldment and unfoldment that rather should be perceived as a movement similar to the hollow movement. This is a bit complicated here, but beneath the division or the separatedness or the apparent separateness of action and intention is the hollow movement, so to speak, underlying both, being more primordial, being more original. And I'd say this is the first time quantum physics gets explained in a quite different field, the hard problem field. And this is the mathematics of quantum physics and the core of reality that is put into an entirely different subject. And thereby we had made the revolutionary step to embody quantum physics. And of course this is not going to be easy. But on the other hand, it's a revolutionary, tremendous step. We are getting close to reality. That's what happens. And that's not easily done for many, many reasons. And I will get into this in the second part. Just hang on a sec. Need to have some coffee. It's quite chilly out here today. I think most of the chilliness is coming from this very annoying wind. Let's clear the things. Movement can here be the enfoldment. What is enfolding? And that is the implicit. Movement is the implicit, and the thought, the intention, is thereby the explicit. The observation of the hyperposition. And the collapse of the unrecognized, unanalyzable movement into some more definitive, that is thought. Can you see the connection here between quantum physics? It's quite exciting. These concepts do help to land going from one area to another one. That would not have been possible before. So the movement is the wholeness. That's the whole of the whole thing. That's the implicit. And that becomes particularly, i.e., understood. And this could be compared to the illustration that is often used to understand Ian McGilchrist's separation between left hemisphere and right hemisphere. And something being particular, something being understood, observed. Take the bird and how the bird sees the seed. From the underlying reality, the potentiality, something is picked out, not being whole anymore. It is being isolated, it's being forehanded. That's the seed. And it becomes understood. I see the seed. That's what the bird is thinking. And once it has been understood, observed, unfolded, it will be unfolded again to make further movements. Movements that then afterwards become acknowledged, i.e. unfolded once more. And here is the unfolding, enfolding and unfolding of the holo movement. And this is nothing less than the understanding of quantum physics that was, until this point for us, only understandable through a complicated mathematical practice. You had to learn it by heart, spending years doing the math, being skilled enough to understand what you were doing and put it into practice. Up to this point, that was the only way to understand these things. And you can say this understanding has now been brought down to our level of mathematical skill and skills in physics. So one could say that the practice, the implicit knowledge of quantum physics has been unfolded for us, understood and observed. And this is truly, definitely tremendous. It's a huge step. It's nothing small at all with this. And to be honest, I'm quite excited. Number 3 here, we go further. It's getting more complicated, I'm afraid. But you're more than welcome to stop the video and give it a thought. But when David Bohm starts talking about proprioception and developing a proprioception for thinking, he goes even a step further and shows that this knowledge from quantum physics can be put into good use. And the reason being that we already know we have proprioception of the curse, the crude and obvious movements, and that goes without saying. De grova rörelserna, the curse movements, the one you can see, the one you can feel easily, we all already have a very good proprioception of those things. When the body really moves, when you have this clear movement, what we want to do is that we start moving that unfoldment, this observance, this understanding, this definitiveness, this particularity to the smaller movements, the more decisive movements, the finer motorical movements that are closer to what we call thinking. So instead of having this complete divide like Descartes fathomed and illustrated, we are going to have a scale going from one to another, almost like going from cold to hot. And we are moving closer to the finer movements that we know that are more connected to intention. And the idea is to drag proprioception to the finer movements, so that you in the end become proprioceptive of thinking. That is, you will unfold thinking. You will understand thinking, because you almost indirectly, I don't know if it's indirectly as such, but almost indirectly, because what you will observe in the beginning are the finer movements. And when those finer movements gets unfolded, then you have an observance also of thinking, intention, because these finer movements is what we perceive as thinking. I hope you remember that from Alexander technique and Diamond and Sperry and who else? Raymond Dart, Frank Pierce Jones. There is no thinking without movement. It's just that those movements are so minute that they go under the observable, they go under the radar for what we can perceive. This can also be seen this way. Instead of thinking of thought as being something unobservable, we've come to understand these things can also be made observable, like the cruder movements. And there's no reason to assume that those movements could not also be made proprioceptive, acknowledged, observed. And then you will have a proprioception of thinking as such, of the intention, before even it's been formed. And here, in this movement, he's pointing exactly to what you find in Alexander technique. It's to stop the intention before it has been formed. Readdress the problem, doing it in some other way. And you will get a stronger intention because you can be more goal-oriented. And here you need to note very, very clear that there is no definite line border as to where something is only movement and where something is 100% thinking. That this is the end of the dualistic project. And here we come to understand that David Bohm does not follow the unrealistic Cartesian divide. But instead he sees it as a progression, if you like, a scale. And this scale is coming from a more mental, spiritual side and progressing towards the corporal, embodied, explicit material, what we usually perceive as explicit, but material. This is the implicit. Be careful that I mention explicit in two different directions. I mean, material as being crude material, maybe it's better termination. Call it crude material, easily seen, easily perceptible, touched, tangible. And I'd say it struck me as this scale is definitely more what we are already perceive things to be. I always thought this complete divide is nonsensical in some intuitive manner. I never been able to think it through and to pinpoint what's wrong with it. It just felt absurd to me that you should have something completely separated, an intuition, an intention I mean, and then you have a movement and there's no connection in between the two. Because for me that felt like spasms. So I have an intention and all of a sudden I move. And lo and behold, that was exactly what Descartes thought. He thought that all intention to move the body came from somewhere else, and he had nothing to do with the soul at all. And that's because that was how he actually felt the whole thing going about. You can talk about a man who had very little body contact. So we are moving to something more realistic. This scale is more realistic. We don't have these great divides usually when it comes to these things. And you don't have this absolute mental side like you would find not only with Descartes but with John Locke, Hume, all the modern analytical philosophers who makes this divide, and a whole lot of the other philosophers who wants to cross it because they don't have the tool to cross it. You need a tool. You do need a picture to come across this. You can't just say, I don't like it. That just won't cut it. You have to see how it could be differently. Otherwise, it's just an argument with not much substance. An argument it is, that's agreed, but it doesn't have much substance. And the substance we need. Otherwise, our argument won't change thinking. And there is another person. He's not a philosopher, but he's well placed to be noted here. And that person is the very great, I would say, Edward de Bono. He died earlier this year in Valletta, Malta. And he had a good understanding that perception, as he called it, perception is like experience. When you change perception, when you change experience, you change also what the person thinks and what he does. But if you only try to change the thinking, the words, the argument, that won't cut it. That won't be enough. You never change a person's doing, acting, if you don't change the perception. He realized that something implicit always is needed. And I think in our world we have this not very embodied idea that arguments are going to change things. Well, they're going to change how we argue about things, how we speak about things, but that doesn't matter that they have any effect. And the only thing we do today in politics is to change how we talk about things. We don't really change anything. And people are upset. Why are they talking that way, and why are they formulating those things? They cannot see the hollow movement, what actually rules. And once again, I have to mention Västlänken here in Gothenburg and all the arguments that's being done for and against. What is the hollow movement? Well, the hollow movement is that it's going to be built. Because why? There is a reality. And when you do things, you plan something, you do all the preparations, and you start with it. That's what is needed. It's not enough with arguments. And to do those things, you need creativity. And saying enough won't cut it. It's out of place somehow. It's a piece of nonsense. It's like saying no to the weather. We people can do things, but we need to have practice into it. We need to have the whole body. Yes, I know there's a lot of people today who had become even more less embodied, if that's possible, sitting on the internet, doing arguments there, and I can tell you that will have even less of an effect. It will have superficial effect. It won't go to the core. What David Bohm is proposing is a real universe made of things that actually has an effect. And that is not something you'd find in Newtonian physics. Nothing in Newtonian physics has an effect. It's something done ex posteriori, and it's a very crude tool that can be put into practice in very, very few situations, and those are all of very technical nature. A way of counting, a way of doing math that is very limited, and you can't transfer that into ordinary thinking. And here you have the usual mistake. We assume everything in this world to be the same, and this assumption we inherited from the Greek, and it's become progressively stronger. Everything is the same, and this has a benefit. so to speak, benefit. And that is that the very shallow, the most shallow unfoldment, observation, thinking, and in the end, even shallower arguments, that they should have an effect. But that takes sameness. So you also need to believe in sameness, and then you can believe in the argument. But by then you cut yourself out of existence. You're no longer in this world. For look here, nothing in this world is the same. Sameness is a tool we use to do things. It's the same as the bird tried to find a seed. You cut out a piece of reality and you turn it into something else in order to do things. There's nothing wrong with it. Action needs to simplify, but that doesn't mean that all these leaves are the same. Although I'm using the same word for them, I call them all leaves. It's an unlawful, unauthorized use of the word same to say reality has the property sameness. It does not at all. And here's going to be loads of protests. People are going to say, it is sameness. I see sameness. I perceive sameness. It has always been sameness, which is typical of this thinking. Well, of course, it could be hard to argue, and you're going to be upset like our friend the quantum physicist went. But the thing is, we discovered that the world is not sameness. We did that in quantum physics. And quantum physics is proven. And I think here we need a proof it's coming from science, because our intuitions are not to be trusted. What is to be trusted? It's science. Let loose of your intuitions here. Just cut the word sameness out of the picture when it comes to reality. More than fine to use it when you try to plan action in a limited sense, but don't apply sameness in that ridiculous classical physical way, even though everybody else is doing that. And I think it's time for a quote here to round things up. And it's my friend, the quantum physicist, who said, it doesn't matter what everybody thinks. What matters is what quantum physics have proven. That's the only thing that's important. And a gazillion people can believe something else. And to be crude, those people have no saying when it comes to the West Link either, even though they might be fighting in different camps and meeting each other on the street demonstrating. The one group is screaming yes to the West Link, the other one is screaming no to the West Link. This is just skådespeleri, acting. It won't have any effect. What it puts in place can only be put out of place with other action. And action is something completely different to argument. And you can argue as much as you can, but you can't make people act. It's very cheap to make demonstrations and protest, but it's a whole lot of a thing to act. And trust me, when you act, it makes a difference. And therefore, and I think that's one of David Bohm's argument, when we find proprioception of thinking, we will be able to do this magical thing, which would be to perceive our own thoughts and fold them, and being able to change thinking. And thereby we will be able to direct our actions. Instead of this limbo when we have to be happy with just arguing, and we know it doesn't have any effect, and the desperation of it makes us argue even harder. Standing screaming in some corner against, I don't know, vaccination or you name it, it won't get you anywhere. I'm not a person that likes sayings too much, but let me round up completely, finish the whole thing off now. Actions speak harder or stronger than words. It has some logic to it, and I think that is something to be pondered. And David Bohm has a very, very strong point here. It will be miraculous to develop this power of directing thought, because that would make us able to do whatever we want to. So it's quite incredible. And it's a gift from reality itself, because this is the working of reality. Take notice of reality. It will help you. It's not a bad boy reality. It's nothing luring there or dragging you down from materialism. Reality is our friend, no doubt about it. Well, I round up there and I say thank you.